So far in Illustrator, we've been working with some really basic tools that have allowed us to create some basic vector shapes. And now it's time to learn the mother of all vector tools, which is called the pen tool. And the pen tool is so powerful because it'll let us draw literally any shape we want. It's kind of the premier tool in Illustrator, and the more advanced you become with drawing vectors, the more you'll use the pen tool because it gives you the most control over the art that you're trying to make. So let's go ahead and create a new document. I'm going to choose the art and illustration preset. I'm going to choose my unit of measurement as inches, and I'll change this to 17 inches by 11 inches high. Leave everything else the same. So in this new document, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and then I'm going to turn on my grid. The grid is something that we haven't used before, but it's great to work a little bit more precisely, especially when we're doing something really manual like the pen tool. So if I go up to view and go down to show grid, that'll turn this on. You can also turn on snap to grid. I'm going to leave it off for now, but if you turn that on, it'll make it so that anything you click on will automatically adjust to one of these grid points. So if you want to work exactly on the grid and don't want to have any deviation from the grid, that can be something that you might want to turn on. In this case, I'm going to leave it off because it'll give me a little bit more flexibility as I work. Can also adjust the way the grid is shown. So if I go up to the Illustrator menu and go to Preferences and then choose Guides and Grid, in this dialog box there are some options here, including the color of the grid, but also the spacing of the large grid lines. Those are these darker grid lines, so those will happen every 1 inch with this current setting. I'm going to leave that as it is. And then the subdivisions, which are these lighter grid lines. Right now there's 8 for every inch. I'm going to reduce that to 4 because I think there's a little bit too much detail here, and 4 will be more correct for what I'm trying to do. So when I click OK, you'll see that that grid will become adjusted so that there's not as much detail inside. Let's turn off our fill color by going up to the swatches drop down and selecting none. That's the little red line. That's going to make it so we don't have any fill in our shape. And then let's go ahead and grab the pen tool and play around with it. You can also select the pen tool by clicking P, that's its keyboard shortcut. And when you use the pen tool, it's kind of like connect the dots. You're creating these anchor points. The anchor points are defining a shape. And once you click on the original anchor point, you'll notice that the cursor changes to have this little O next to it. That's telling us that we're going to close off the shape. So now we have a fully functional shape. This is really similar to what we would have created with the square tool. So it's a vector shape just like any other. So if we use the square tool, we really get the exact same thing. Another tool that goes hand in hand with the pen tool is the direct selection tool. We've already worked a little bit with the regular selection tool. The direct selection tool is a little bit different. So we can click on that or use the A hotkey to bring it up. And when we use the direct selection tool, instead of selecting entire objects, we're actually going to just select individual anchor points. So again, this square is made up of 4 anchor points. If I click on one of those anchor points, you'll see that it goes solid blue, whereas the other 3 anchor points are hollow. So it's telling me that this anchor point is now selected. And if I click and drag, you'll see that I'm actually modifying the shape because I've moved the location of that anchor point that is defining the shape. And by moving it, I've changed this into more of a trapezoid shape. Could do the same with the square that I created using the rectangle tool. It works the same. These are both vector objects. So the direct selection tool is great for modifying shapes that you've already created. You can also use the pen tool to create curved shapes. This is actually where a lot of the power of the pen tool comes in. So I'm going to click to start a new shape, but then for this second anchor point, I'm going to click and hold, and actually drag out. When I drag out, you'll see that I'm starting to generate a curve. And I have these handles that are coming out of both sides. Those handles are responsible for defining curves using the pen tool. So if I click and release, you can see that this curve here is still being defined by those 2 anchor points, but this little handle at the top and bottom is kind of like a magnet. That's the way I like to think of it. So if I click and create another point and then close off this shape, I'll go back to the direct selection tool to kind of examine what's happening here. So you can see that we have 3 anchor points still defining a shape, but without these handles, this shape would be a triangle. But with these handles, there's actually a little bit of curvature that's happening. So again, it's like a magnet. This is like a magnet, and this is like a magnet. It's attracting the curve and making it pull up and curve towards its next anchor point. And then same with the handle on the other side. So whenever you create a handle, by default, it'll create a symmetrical handle on the other side. And again, that is causing this curve to be pulled towards or attracted to that anchor point, which is causing it to curve down to the next anchor point instead of going directly towards it. So that's the way that curves work using the pen tool. And you can see that if we create a ellipse or a circle, it's going to work in the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and create a circle here. I'm going to hold down Shift to make sure that it's a perfect circle. Then if I grab the direct selection tool and just sort of examine what's happening here, you'll see that this circle is made up of 4 different anchor points. And each one of those anchor points has either a horizontal or a vertical handle that is symmetrical on both sides. And that is what is causing this to have that circular shape. So we can draw that the same using the pen tool. I'm going to grab the pen tool here, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to click and drag to extend those handles. I'm going to hold down Shift, because if I hold down Shift, it'll constrain the handle to be at a 45-degree angle. So that will allow me to make sure that I'm perfectly horizontal. And I always want to drag out the handle in the direction that I'm going to draw. So since I'm going to draw in a clockwise fashion, I'm going to drag the handle out this way. Okay, so that's the first anchor point. Then I'll go down to the second anchor point, drag again towards the direction that I'm going. The third anchor point, going to drag out. Then the fourth anchor point, going to drag up, again holding down Shift. And then when I connect the last anchor point, I'm going to have to drag out one more time to extend that handle backwards. So I'm going to kind of remake that handle right there. And there we go. That's another circle shape. So you can see that those are pretty similar. This one might not be perfect because the handles might be a little bit off, but it's the same idea. And if I did some refinement, I could create that perfect circle. So the last thing we want to do is create some shapes that have a combination of curved and straight sides. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the stuff we've been working on so far and grab the pen tool. Then I'm going to click once to create a new shape and click again to create a second anchor point. And then if I hover over that latest anchor point that I created, you'll see that the cursor will change to have this little caret next to it. And that caret is telling us that we can click to convert that anchor point. So right now this is a straight-sided figure, but if I click and drag, I can extend a handle outwards. I'm going to hold down Shift to extend that handle straight up. Then you'll see that the next anchor point I'm creating will be defined with a curve. That's because this single handle is affecting the way this next anchor point is acting. So it's creating a curve. I'm going to create another anchor point. This time I'm going to drag the handles outwards in a horizontal manner. And then I'm going to click to create another anchor point with a vertical handle. So you can see now I've created a straight-sided figure that has a hump. And let's say for the next anchor point, I didn't want this curve. I can, again, click on this latest anchor point to convert it. In this case, since we have a handle, if I click once, it's going to erase that latest handle. Then I can go back to creating a straight-sided figure. So that's a really basic way to create a combination of straight and horizontal points. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that shape and start a new one. I want to show you one more example. So I'm going to click and drag out and start creating a shape very similar to how we created the circle. I'm going to click and drag down to define the second point. But this time, instead of continuing with the circle, I'm instead going to hold down Option. When I hold down Option, I'm going to get that little caret again. This is going to allow me to have temporary access to the Convert Anchor Point tool. And that'll allow me to click and drag this handle to wherever I want it to go. So you can see by default, the handles are symmetrical. But when I hold down this tool, I can move it to a different place. So in this case, I'm going to hold down Shift and actually make it horizontal instead of vertical. And now when I create my next anchor point, you'll see that I'm starting to go in a different direction here. So there we go. Again, I'm going to hold down Option and convert that and bring it down. And now I'm creating sort of a scallop-sided figure. Same thing, going to convert that point and then continue on here. hold on, Option, bring that up, and then close up the shape. So those are the basics of the pen tool. And believe it or not, with just what I've shown you, you can literally create any shape you want. So any art that you've admired in the past that has been vector art, you can create with just these simple steps. It's a tool that has a very steep learning curve, so definitely don't feel discouraged if this doesn't feel intuitive to you. It doesn't feel intuitive to anyone when you just start out. The more you use it, the more natural it'll start to feel. It's a tool that can take years to master, and the fact that it is so manual is what makes it so difficult, but also what makes it really powerful. So definitely get in a lot of practice with this tool. I recommend doing things like tracing photographs or tracing vector art that you love. You can also trace typography or icons or logos. Anything that will get your hands dirty with this tool and get you that practice will really help. So keep at it, and I'll see you in the next video.